Welcome to VR Hermits, a podcast about virtual reality development. I'm Dave Ramsey.
And I'm Joe Simpson. Let's get started. Anyway, we should have a podcast.
I mean, if we're going to, we probably should.
Okay. So what's going on with you, Dave?
Not a whole heck of a lot. I'm gearing up for trying to get started again, but just keep bumping into distractions. It's reached the stage where the distractions are really, really annoying, but I'm still getting distracted.
Nice.
That's not exceptionally helpful. How's things at your end?
Pretty good. I think I don't know if this is quite what you're talking about, but sometimes I will just kind of be done working for a while, and then I will pick up one of my hobbies like reading or watching anime or researching a specific topic, and I will do that obsessively for a couple of days or a week. You know, maybe watch 100 episodes of anime in a week. Like, okay, that's enough anime for the quarter. And then I'll just kind of be done with that for a while. I'm like, okay, time to go back to work.
I've been doing that recently with a lot of my fiction reading.
Yeah.
It used to be that I always had one or two books going basically constantly. And now I will read 4 books in 5 days and then read hardly anything for pleasure for the next 2 weeks. I don't know.
Yeah, I've always been much more of a steady hour to an hour and a half a day reader.
Mm-hmm.
For the last couple of months, I've really dialed that down to just focus on learning more. I'm still reading a lot, but it's reading documentation and programming books. Doesn't quite scratch the same itch. But it's what I need to do.
Yeah. So I understand you finished the Wenderlich book.
Yes. So I finished that Monday and Tuesday last week. And like we talked about, there was some of it that I just read through quickly and some of it that I worked through and took a lot out of it. So there was 4 sections left to go through. There was 2D platforming, Blender, a tower defense game that had a virtual reality chapter as part of the section, but the game itself wasn't necessarily just a VR game. And then there was the appendices, which honestly I think I took the most out of those 3 chapters, maybe for the entire book. Those 3 chapters are probably worth just buying the book.
Really?
Just a ton of information packed into 3 short chapters about C#, about the Unity API, and code editors. And just the differences between Visual Studio and Mono Develop, and that one was pretty quick. The Unity API stuff, just a lot of really good stuff there. Just the common stuff you're going to run up against the most. And then there's the C#, was just a crash course lesson on C# and Unity. So yeah, I guess starting with the 2D platformer stuff, that was one I intentionally didn't work through. In fact, I just threw the PDF on my iPad and went to the park and just walked around and sat on benches as I read that. It was about 100 pages. And then, pretty basic stuff. If I ever do a 2D game, then I know where to go to brush up on it. But it wasn't too dissimilar from what I did in SpriteKit. In Xcode, definitely more advanced than SpriteKit and a bit more coherent. Like, oh, they've actually designed this and it makes sense the way that it works. But wasn't really anything that I'm going to do. It would be almost kind of cruel to make a 2D VR game. Like, hey, you just put this headset on and go into this immersive world and maybe show you a super realistic 3D environment splash screen and then just jam a giant screen like 10 inches from your face. There you go, play a 2D game in VR. Now I kind of want to do it just because.
Yeah, I that kind of seemed inspiring, Joe. I don't
know if I want to release that, but
it's like, yeah. I bet you could do something really interesting there. I'm thinking of like layers of sprites in a 2D game, but you let the layers have visual difference between them. So you just, every increasing layer in the Z layering would introduce like a 1/4 inch of space. And so these things would be kind of floating over each other, and I don't know, could be neat.
Yeah, one of the games I want to make someday, or just general overall game concept that I want to make someday, is kind of a combination of a VR game and a 2D platformer, where I'm in VR and I'm basically in Mario's position. I'm walking down the level and doing whatever I need to do, fighting the battles and jumping over things. And you or somebody else is outside of VR on another screen, and you can see things that I can't.
Right.
And I can see things that you can't. So we have to kind of work together to solve the game. Or maybe it's just a spectator thing. Maybe you take turns in the headset and you can still see things that I can't, but you're cruel and don't want to help me. Things like that. I think that would be a lot of fun.
There was a game that I saw a demo of. I don't recall the name of it. It was I think it was more of a proof of concept at this stage than anything else, but they had a full VR like first person shooter, but then they also had support for people using their phones, not really in an AR sort of way, but as a motion controller sort of thing. So you would look through the screen. It was kind of like AR or phone-based VR. But you would basically move the phone around, looking around in the room, and then you could fire your guns from there. So it was like you had a little portal onto the same VR space that the VR person was playing in. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so even if you weren't in the game, you could still participate. They were trying to get around the problem where, for the most part, like in a single room, VR makes a relatively iffy party game experience.
Yeah. Yeah, there's some fun stuff there. There was a couple things I picked up about Unity from that section. Mm-hmm. There's a couple highlights I took, but for the most part, it was just, reading through it as quickly as possible. Like, I'm not really going to use this, and just charging blindly ahead.
Mm-hmm. So it'll be really interesting, I think, to ask you in, say, 6 months what you think of the Wenderlich book. Mm-hmm. After you've had more time and you can look back on it and go, okay, how good a starting point was it? But I'd still like to get a baseline for comparison. So as a whole, not just individual chapters or whatever like that, but as a whole, what did you think of the Wenderlich book as a starting point for Unity?
It works for me. They teach in a way that is good for me, and having written material over video is good for me. The videos are helpful for certain things, especially as I'm learning more and more about Maya. I find watching somebody do something visual is much more helpful than trying to read through, 15 paragraphs of what can be summed up in a 10-second YouTube clip. Mm-hmm. But for understanding Unity, understanding the concepts behind it and how it's architected and put together and how everything ties together in the editor and how the component system works and the event system works, reading through that and working through it with the book is a much better way for me to learn. Not everybody is like that, but I would rather read. Given the choice, I'd almost always rather read than watch a video. Overall, I think it's done a lot to prepare me. I don't think I'm anywhere near just opening Unity and just kind of knowing what to do. Mm-hmm. Like, there's still pretty much a lot of thinking like, okay, I know what I want to do, how to get started. A lot of Googling, a lot of figuring stuff as I go. But I know enough now to know my way around and to know the big picture stuff of just kind of how it all works. It's going to be one of those books, like when I did their Sprite Kit book, I referred to it constantly as I was working on the Random Arrow project. Mm-hmm. And so I've taken just a ton of highlights in this book. And usually when I do a tutorial series or a book, I keep all my notes in a separate Markdown file. This time I did the entire thing in preview and just highlighted the sections that I wanted and did inline notes. So everything is just in this one PDF.
I'm almost tempted to buy, when I buy the book, I will set that copy aside and then ask for a copy of yours.
So yeah, it's pretty good stuff. There was, in terms of the quality of the book itself, the first two sections, the getting started section and the first person shooter section. So there's basically two different games, the Bobblehead Wars and then a Robot Rampage. Those two were probably the best sections, and I think they were kind of the main guy working on the book. The sections after that were all done by different authors and different editing teams, and just, varying degrees of just different styles of teaching, different styles of coding. In section 5, the tower defense game, the people who wrote that one, they really, really, really like Singletons, and they used them a lot. And having spent enough time in the Apple dev community, I felt like, no one ever told me this, it was never offered as a threat, but I felt like if I wrote a Singleton in Swift, I was going to be shot. Like, don't do it.
It's not that severe.
Are you sure?
There are certainly people for whom it is that severe.
I've never risked it. Like, I don't want the Singleton ninjas to bang my door down, and no, just it's been scary. But in Unity, they're pretty common, especially among game managers. It's kind of the easiest way to make a game manager. And they're right in the Unity documentation, so it's perfectly acceptable design pattern. It's just weird how different communities form kind of almost dogmatic ideas about certain things.
Yeah, I mean, even within Apple's APIs, they use Singletons here and there. Generally, it seems, and I'm kind of talking out of my tail end here, but generally it seems when the thing that is being represented is only a singleton and is only ever a singleton, will they expose the interface as a singleton. So you get it with things like a shared hardware manager. This code is running on one and only one computer. Therefore, every piece of code on this machine, if it wants to know what kind of computer it's running on, doesn't really have to instantiate its own representation of that hardware. It just asks the operating system for the shared hardware manager device thing.
Yeah.
And you get a pointer to that thing, and then you can go ahead and ask it questions. So it's not like you never ever can use a singleton, though they hardly ever call them singletons. It's shared thingies.
I don't think that's the official term.
The shared part is, the thingy part less so.
Yeah. Yeah, I know where these ideas come from, of whenever a specific group of people or a community has a very strong opinion of what not to do, it's usually because it's a common pitfall for new developers or people starting out on that platform. So there's a ton of things in FileMaker that no one should ever do until you know enough about FileMaker, and then it's fine.
Right.
But there are, it's been a couple of years since I've spent a lot of time on the FileMaker forums, but there were just a lot of times where somebody would post a question and one of the experienced developers, but maybe not one of the friendliest developers, would just post a giant rant about how no one should ever do that. And you've been horribly misled. You're making terrible choices. And are you sure you want to be a FileMaker developer? Because this may not be for you. Yeah, it's funny how those things develop, and just completely different things in different communities.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
different biases.
You aren't going to go wrong by telling, and this will be a little bit in the FileMaker world, so I apologize if this bothers people. in the FileMaker world, you aren't going to go wrong by telling a new developer to never, ever, ever use repeating fields. Eventually, they're going to learn that there are absolutely times when you should use repeating fields.
Yeah.
Because they're better for certain kinds of problems. The trick is that they are never better for the kinds of problems that you want to use them for when you're a new developer.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, the thing that it seems they're good for is not what they're good for. They're good for completely different problems. And so, if you don't get far enough in first, you're going to have a problem. I'll give you an example from my own code. Is in FM Perception, I'm using a Singleton to manage registration. There's a shared registration controller, and I instantiate one of them at the application level, but I need things all over the system to be able to query this. And I don't necessarily want to pass a pointer to this object all over the place. And I don't want to run two completely independent registration controllers that are each checking with the server to make sure things are okay or something like that. That's all going to turn into a humongous nightmare. Mm-hmm. I instantiate one of them. Any other object in the system can go, hey, give me a pointer to the shared thing. And can go, hey, are we registered? Yes. Good. Thank you. Move on.
Yeah.
Otherwise, what ended up happening was, and this may just be my own lack of skill, so, take even that with a grain of salt, but it's entirely possible that I've done that wrong. But it ended up, every way that I tried to fix that problem without a Singleton involved too many parts of the system knowing about too many other parts of the system.
Yeah.
Like, I had to have this message passing chain all up and down the hierarchy of the system, from the application to the document controller to the individual documents to functions within those documents. I had to be able to pass this thing up and down, back and forth, and know that it was always going to be okay. And it was a huge amount of work to avoid a Singleton.
Yeah. Yeah. That's one thing that I'm keeping a running list of things not to learn and things not to do in Unity and Maya. And it's the early stage that I'm in, I'm new at this, but I'm not new at learning things like this. So I've taught myself FileMaker, I've taught myself PHP and web technologies, and I know enough about the process to kind of look out for the gotchas in my own learning habits. And so I can hopefully avoid the pitfalls of, well, let me give you an example. When I was learning iOS development and I was working in core data, I had like a month where I was just obsessed with doing it the right way. What are the best practices around this? What is the right way to do this? Looking for almost a dogmatic approach, like I had kind of made for myself in FileMaker.
Right.
When I make a database, I know what to do. I don't have to ask anybody. I don't have to think about it. I know you hand me pretty much any business case or issue, and I can figure it out and make a database out of it. And I was trying to use that same level of confidence in a place where I have no experience. And it turned into just weeks of me spinning my wheels and getting a little bit of progress and then undoing it because it didn't seem right, and just not understanding the design patterns and not understanding how Swift dealt with certain issues or the APIs dealt with certain issues. And I never made any progress on that project. It's still sitting half finished in a folder somewhere. Whereas when I started working on Random Arrow, it was much more of a problem solving. I treated the entire project as a series of bugs, basically. Like, here's the things I want to do. These aren't working, so make them work, and then move on, and then loop back around and kind of keep making them better until I have something that I don't feel terrible about submitting to the App Store. So I'm trying to apply that same type of logic now, or the same type of learning now, where I just need to learn what I need to learn to ship something. I need to get the confidence of having shipped something in Daydream or on some VR platform. And I don't want to just ship like garbage. I actually wanted to have something fun that people would enjoy playing and maybe pay a couple bucks for. But at the same time, I'm not going to get obsessed over how clean the code is, and I'm not going to open source anything to show people, this is the best way to make this type of thing. Like, no, I'm going to write the code the fastest way that I can. And if that means, simple things like I read a lot today about the best ways to organize your Unity project. And in my opinion, there's a couple of folders I'm going to use, and the best way I'm going to organize it is to not organize it and just use decent naming on things and search for what I need. And that is a great approach for someone like me working by myself with no other developers or artists or anybody else on a small project. If I was working on a bigger project, I would need to reconsider that. Or if I was working with somebody else, I would need to reconsider that. But there was a book I read about a year ago called Algorithms to Live By that really changed a lot of my obsession with organizing stuff, and especially the way that I deal with notes and email and managing projects now. I almost want everything just in a chronological list, sort of descending. Like if I could sort my entire life like that, that would be fine. Because anytime I open my computer and need something, it's almost always something that I was just working on within the last couple of days.
Right.
I really don't ever need to scroll very far. And then anything else I can search for. Things like Spotlight and the Google Cloud search, things like that have gotten so good that I just don't need to organize in the same way. And that brings me to something I wanted to complain about, otherwise known as, what really deletes my semicolon, Dave?
Wow. What really deletes your semicolon?
Forums. When forums, I really like forums. I like to learn a lot from them. But this one is specifically pointing at the Unity community forums, where they've got different forums for each different thing. And you've got to figure out which one of these giant cavernous rooms that you belong into for your specific topic. And I realized this is a huge platform, and having some kind of organization is a good thing. But whenever I see a forum like that, it seems like 10 to 20% of the content in the forums is just somebody telling somebody else you posted this in the wrong place.
Yeah, they almost need a forum where you can post your thing and they'll move it for you.
Well, I think the better approach is just to have one general forum and a tagging system. Everything goes to the same place, and tag it by the things that you care about. And then you just filter the list down to what the tags you care about, rather than having separate places entirely.
Yeah.
Yeah, it just always kind of bugs me. I was thinking back to the FileMaker forum before they did their revamp a couple of years ago, where it was basically the social media platform that I used at the time. Every day, I would start my day off by loading that page up and just looking through what people had been having issues with and seeing what I could solve. And sometimes I had answers to post and sometimes I didn't. But I learned a lot from just looking at other people's problems and seeing how they were solved. Right. I'm trying to repeat that now with Unity. I'm like, well, I don't even know where to start. There's 18 different categories to start on, and they each have subcategories, and some of them have subcategories. I'm like, wow, really? Can't just get a feel for what's going on? Anyway, so something else in the Ray Wenderlich book was I tried my best to be open-minded about the section on Blender. And it did not go well. I really did. I thought about it the day before. I'm like, hey, this could actually save me $35 a month if I can get used to this thing. And I know the quality of the tutorials are going to be good enough that I can learn from. And I'm not sure how far I made it. There's 3 chapters in this section. I probably made it through most of the first chapter. I gave it a good 2 hours, and I've got lots of highlights. And there was a couple of highlights right off the bat. Like, this isn't just a me thing. Some of the quotes, this makes Blender very awkward to beginners. but you get used to it in time. That said, you can still change the left mouse button to both select and act on an object, as is common with almost every other application on Earth. Real kind of snarky things like that. Blender is a free 3D modeling and animation tool and is widely used and actively supported, but many game developers are immediately daunted by its unique user interface. Yeah, unique. It's not low quality software per se. Mm-hmm. It's not like it's just like a bunch of pieces coupled together. There is a coherent method to this software. It's just made by people who think in a very different way than I do. And they use their computers in a very different way than I do. And I just couldn't wrap my head around it. There's even a mode in Blender where you can switch Blender into working with Maya type controls. But doing that made it impossible to follow along the tutorial. So I just gave up.
So once you know Maya really well, maybe you take another stab at Blender using Maya controls, but probably not.
Yeah, probably not. It got pretty frustrating. I mean, my highlights are just highlights, but they look angrier as I go along and flip through the PDF. like there's more yellows and reds in the highlights and less blues and greens.
Actually, there's another whole topic that we should probably do at some point, which is how do you color code that stuff?
I have my own color code system that I use for different types of projects internally. And that's pretty much the only kind of color coding I do. Usually with highlights, I just use the default yellow highlight, but this book I tried to get a little smart with it. But yeah, don't have much coherency there. My own personal system, I use yellow for anything personal. I use orange for anything program related. I use purple for FileMaker stuff. I use blue for anything related to my company. And those are pretty much the core colors. And I thought it was kind of funny when I moved to using Google Keep, there is no purple. So I can no longer take any notes relating to FileMaker.
And you're kind of okay with that.
Yep. For now. Yeah. So the rest of the book, let's see. Then there was, so I tried and utterly failed with the Blender section. The tower defense game was actually kind of a fun game to make. That was the one where the teaching style was a little bit different, and I'm not sure if I would code in the same way or lay out my game objects in the same way. Mm-hmm. But it was a fun little game to make because it was just a tile-based game where you just, you point and click on a tile to tell where you want towers to spawn, and it's pretty much just on autopilot from there. Really small game, but it was kind of fun to make. And then, after that, I was just finishing up the appendices. And so I finished up all that Monday and Tuesday and rewarded myself with copious amounts of ice cream and anime and not doing much for a day. And then I spent some time just diving into the project that I'm working on. I did a little bit of prototyping and just testing and getting some basic stuff working with the Google VR APIs. And I got just far enough to discover what may be a bug or may just be an undocumented change in the API. But two of the classes that are listed in the API documentation, one of which I found is missing because it's in a tutorial that I was trying to work through. It's just gone. These two script files are just no longer in version 1.7 of the SDK. They're in 1.6. They're not in 1.7. There's nothing in the release notes that says that they were removed or changed, and there was nothing on the GitHub issues. So I posted an issue about that this morning. But I was kind of like, know what to do. Do I need these things? They look important.
Yeah. I always love those bugs, particularly at the beginning of your work, because you just don't even begin to have the ability to identify where the problem is.
Yeah. And I tried, the heavy-handed approach of like, I'll just copy the files into the project from the old SDK. No. Way too many things have changed. And, there were dozens of errors in the file as soon as I opened it in Visual Studio. Like, okay, so definitely something has changed, but I'm not seeing the change recorded anywhere. And their change log is really, really detailed. So I'm thinking they just, like an entire line just got clipped or something. It's not like they're being ambiguous. So hopefully I'll have an answer to that. I tried, just my troubleshooting mentality. I tried copying in the old files from the previous SDK. I tried importing it into a new project and using the Unity Assets importer, which is the way I got it the first time. See if they showed up that way. Weren't there. I tried downloading the source code and unzipping it and rifling through that and still didn't find it. So yeah, those two files are just gone, and there's no documented reason why they're gone. They haven't been renamed to anything else that I can find. And they're kind of important. I will have to figure that out this week, or have hopefully somebody get back to me on GitHub. But yeah, then I pretty much I didn't work too hard the rest of the week. It was just a little bit of prototyping and kind of writing out what I want to accomplish with the project, but not in a ton of detail. I really just wrote out, what do I want to accomplish in the first iteration of this thing? Kind of thinking what you had kind of hammered home many times last year, which was just get to the point where you can find out if the idea is fun.
Right.
So that's what I'm trying to do here, is just, I've got an idea. I think it's going to be fun, but I need to actually prove to myself and to other people that this thing is fun, even if it's super basic and just, blocky primitive objects. Is the idea fun? And then if it is, kind of go on from there. I'm not sure how long that'll take. Maybe that'll take me a week. Maybe that'll take me 2 weeks or 3 weeks. I don't think it'll take me that long, but I have no idea. Yeah, I pretty much just took it easy the rest of the week and spent some time watching anime and taking long walks and doing a lot of nothing and thinking and kind of enjoying it. So today I dove back into a couple tutorials and trying to get used to Maya a little bit. And it's just, there's a lot to take in. I like it. It's just a lot. So what's going on with you?
Not a whole lot. I think we already covered that.
So last week we alluded to talking more about Visual Studio. So you've been working on an off-the-shelf software solution for developers who make custom applications in FileMaker. You built this massive database analysis tool, and you started it in Swift and got it working, and then you made a Windows version in C#, and you've got nearly 2 years of experience working in both of those side by side. And I thought that's kind of that puts you in kind of a unique position. I'm not sure how many other people have that combination.
Me neither. Yeah, there are definitely things that are nice in Visual Studio, and there are things that are horrifying. Most of the things that are horrifying, I think, are usually on the interface side. I'm really not a fan of the way the interface tools in Visual Studio work.
You mean the interface tools for creating interfaces or the interface of Visual Studio?
The interface tools for creating interfaces.
Okay.
There are effectively 3 different panes that you have to juggle between to get done what you need to get done. So there's a visual pane where you're laying out the components of your interface. And then there is the XML pane where they are taking the information about the interface object that you just placed and showing you the XML that tells it to put that object there. And then you can edit that XML to add capabilities or adjust things. So, for example, if you placed a button, it would get the button size and location from the visual side and just write that information into the XML for you. And then you could double click on that button and, type in the label that you want the button to display. And that totally works. And it would, again, update the XML for you. But there are things that you can't do from the visual side, at which point you either have to do them in the inspector on the side, or you have to do them in the XML. But to do them in the XML, you kind of already got to know what the tag is. Like what tag or what XML attribute will do the thing that you need. It's got some code completion. So if you've got an idea of what the thing is going to be, you're fine. But, I don't know if you recall how horrifyingly confusing it was seeing Apple's inspector in Xcode.
Yeah.
Like, I just clicked on this object. Now there are 6 different tabs, 7, 8 different tabs for properties that I can change on this object, and none of it makes any sense. Well, functionally, so does Visual Studio.
The one in Xcode starts to make sense after a while, especially when you realize you really only need 3 of those tabs a lot.
Right.
But I think Unity is a good example where you can still have many, 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 many objects, sometimes hundreds of properties in an inspector without having a confusing inspector interface.
Right.
Like they've got that grouping where you can just shrink things down into one lines, property, or what are they called, attribute groups or property groups.
Visual Studio's inspector uses a kind of a disclosure area thing. And so there's 3 to 10 different sections. And so you hit the disclosure triangle for that section and it'll display 3 to 5 properties. But at the bottom of that list of properties is a thing that says like more information. And you click that and another 30 properties pop up. Because it's trying to hide from you a bunch of the complication, but very often that's where I need to get into. Anyway, this isn't necessarily relevant to VR game development, so I didn't want to get stuck on the visual side. As far as code editing in Visual Studio goes, I've been generally really pleased. The editor's been fast. Like any substantive code editor, there are 1,000 settings. Things that you can toggle to make the editor operate in some different manner. And they are almost entirely inscrutable, but Google makes a pretty good interface to figuring out what the thing is that you need to go find.
Yeah.
The only huge annoyance that I've had with the editor is the insert/delete mode shift, where there's a key command that you can hit in Windows, and I still don't have the thing memorized, where if you hit it, it will toggle such that when you type a character, rather than just inserting it at the insertion point, it will replace the character immediately after the insertion point. I.e., it will delete the next character and replace it with the one that you're putting in. Now, I've played with enough weird code to understand that there are certain situations where you might need that, but it's getting down to like hex editing files where the edit that you have to do has to consume the exact same number of bytes. This is not a feature that I ever need from my text editor.
Yeah.
Except for the very, very rare situation, like once in 20 years, where I need to do that kind of thing. And honestly, I'm going to use something else. But so there's this weird key command. I can't remember the weird key command. There's no option for me to turn off that toggle, to just say, you know what? Never set it to delete. Always just do insert. And there's a little box in the corner of the screen that tells you which mode it's in. Clicking on that box has no impact on the mode.
Nice.
It's like I can see the thing that tells me I'm in the wrong place, but there's nothing there to help me fix it.
So they do have a pretty sophisticated key binding thing in Visual Studio. What you need to do next time this happens, figure out what the key command was, and then change it in the key binding to like Control, Alt, and like 9 other keys or something. Something that's almost impossible to do on accident.
That might work. I think part of the, and you know, here's my additional caveat. I think part of the difficulty is probably being caused by the fact that I'm doing almost all my Visual Studio development in a VM. So in Parallels from a Mac. And so my problem is being caused when my muscle memory tells me to use a Mac key command while I'm in Windows. And so
Parallels flip those modifier keys for you?
It does, but that doesn't mean that I'm not doing something that it doesn't know how to deal with. So say I'm doing like, you know, Control Shift something. Well, does it now flip those? Because it should be Command something. Like, I use a lot of key commands on the Mac side, and I have a lot of muscle memory for those. So part of the difficulty is I'm not even sure what it is that I'm hitting that's getting the wrong thing.
Yeah.
But regardless, it's something that most people on the Windows side apparently never hit. But
I hit it once on the Razor, and I didn't know what had happened. I didn't diagnose that I had gone from one mode to the other. I just saw that, okay, the text editor has turned into Pac-Man and is eating everything after it. So I did the only logical thing, which was restart the machine. And that fixed the issue.
Yeah.
And that should be called Pac-Man mode if it's not.
I'm perfectly fine if they leave everything exactly the way it is, but clicking on the little spot that says DEL should change it to INS. Just do that. It's not going to fix all the problems because you're still going to have people who don't know that that's what that's indicating. You know, it's just a little tiny box in the lower right-hand corner of the editor window. So yeah, I mean, I've had a couple of crashes, one of which ate a file. The crashes are annoying, but I've had enough experience with Apple's development environments to be kind of okay when the thing crashes. You just move on. But I had lost all my edits to a file since my last commit. And unfortunately, it was while I was doing a large-scale code migration. So I hadn't actually done a commit in the last 1,000 lines of code. You know, I moved over 3 functions, changed them from their Swift form to their C# form, and then would do a commit. And then move over another couple of functions, you know, a small family of things. Okay, now do a commit. You know, once I tested and everything was happy, that's when I would do the commit. And it lost like 1,000 lines of migrated code, which took me an hour to reproduce So it wasn't catastrophic, but it was really annoying launching the thing and bringing it back up. And it knew that the file was there. It knew there was a file with that name, and that file had 0 characters in it. It was just empty. It wasn't even corrupted. It was just dead. So, but again, not a recurring thing or anything like that. And the performance has been fantastic. Dealing with large code text files in Visual Studio is dramatically faster than doing it in Xcode. Okay. Like Xcode gets really unhappy if I throw a 2,000 or 3,000 line source file at it.
I would too.
Yeah. I mean, part of the difficulty is that there are sections within my software that are dealing with complex structured XML code. And so it has to say, okay, what kind of node did we just get handed? Do something different based upon each of those nodes. Each of the options. The problem is there's 200 options. There isn't a way for me to make this thing do a single function that's just 10 lines, and then another function that's 10 lines, and then another function that's 10 lines, and they're all really clean and really... Somewhere there's got to be a big switch statement.
No, clearly you need to write 200 classes. What's wrong with you?
Yeah, not so much. So it's a weird use case. I get that this is not a normal situation when people are normally looking at good code. I'm not even going to argue that this is good code. Works pretty well.
It is because it works. The app works really fast, and it blows all of its competitors out of the water. So I would call that good code.
Okay. Well then, thank you. But this is a thing that I get to deal with fairly regularly. There's a couple of spots in the system where that happens, and so it's very easy with 200 or 300 options to have 2 or 3 lines of code per option, and now you've got 1,000 lines.
Yeah.
And I don't want to move, each of those lines might be doing something special. So those are calling out to external functions. I could place all of those external functions in another file, but that's not actually helping me.
Yeah.
Like, I hate when the editor is trying to or placing restrictions upon how I organize my code. Like, if I want to put 200 functions in a list because all these functions are dealing with kind of the same node level and they're just repackaging kind of the same source data and spitting it out kind of the same way, but they're all doing something different with it. And I want to make those into a bunch of clean functions and they're all nicely lined up and well organized. That should work. That's actually why I upgraded my computer, was because it didn't work well on my 6-year-old Mac laptop.
Yeah.
It started choking because the type ahead and code completion on Swift is doing compilation as you type to check your code. Well, it keeps trying to do that with a 3,000 line file. And it reached the point where single characters, I would type a 5-character word and it would go character, 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 character on screen. And that's the point at which we have to stop and do something else.
That's not okay.
But I never had any of those problems with Visual Studio, and that's even running in a VM. Like, the performance has been fantastic. The type ahead's really nice. It all works really well. So yeah, as far as that goes, I mean, I've been generally pleased. It's been fascinating to see the difference between the two environments and to get a sense for what that does to the platforms.
Yeah.
Like, just getting started in the full Windows Visual Studio environment is really complicated because Visual Studio supports like 12 or 15 different languages. and multiple different kinds of interface systems, interface libraries, stuff like that. You can still make, with Visual Studio, you can make a Windows Forms app. You can make a WPF app. You can make a Windows 8.1 whatever. I can't remember what that was called. And then now in Windows 10, they've got the UWP, the Unified Windows Platform. And that's all just completely different visual display layers. Oh, and also command line stuff. And I'm probably missing half a dozen others.
Yeah.
And trying to figure out how to get all of that in place so you can write your first program is a little fun. But it's all there.
Yeah, I remember the first time I opened FileMaker and, a friend gave me a copy of FileMaker and said, teach yourself some of this over the weekend and we'll talk about it. And I installed it and I made a table and made some records. I think without even going into Meta's database, I did that just from the table view. And then I accidentally ended up in this weird mode where there was little green dots on fields. And I had no idea where I was. It was called FileMaker layout mode. I know all about it now, but just a tool that seems simple now because I'm used to it. It's good to remind myself that these things seemed incredibly complicated at first, and you get used to it pretty quickly. Unity. 2 or 3 weeks ago, I had no idea how to navigate around Unity, and now I'm pretty confident and comfortable just getting around and figuring out at least where to go to find the thing. Maya is going to take a bit more time because there's so many more things to do there, and they don't like to put labels on anything. Everything is an icon. I'm like, is there an accessibility mode that I can turn on somewhere? That would be great. I know words are still a thing that can exist in computer programs and toolbars, but it's good to remind myself, like when I opened Xcode for the first time a couple years ago, I was like, I don't even know where to start. Thank goodness there's Swift Playgrounds that I can write some Hello World code in to at least not feel like I've failed today. And then, a couple weeks later, you kind of get a feel for it. Same thing with Unreal Engine and Unity, and my experience with Visual Studio has been pretty basic because I'm running all the code I've ever written in Visual Studio has either been for Unreal Engine or Unity. So basically just attaching things to game objects. And I'm curious, all the code you've written has been C#. I did some C++ stuff in Unreal Engine, and I'm not sure if it's the language. I get a feeling that it's more the game engine. I mean, you've got the entire chunk of code for the game engine with an Unreal Engine project, and it's a lot of code. And compiling the code just takes time. Even just making a new Unreal Engine project and making a Hello World app that just prints Hello World to the console, that can take 10 seconds to compile, where I'm not running into that with C#. And I think it's the way that I read about the different languages and how they compile differently, and C# is a just-in-time compiled language, and kind of shook my fist at my iPad and read something else. That's the type of stuff you should explain to me. This is, again, Joe doesn't have a computer science background and makes himself sound like an idiot on a podcast, but
that's okay. Dave has a computer science background and makes himself sound like an idiot on a podcast, so
yeah. But yeah, it's just different. I'm wondering if you've run into stuff where, like, you've got a pretty big project in a pretty beefy computer. What are your compile times like? Just making regular changes and working. What's your day like when you sit down? Are you waiting 30 seconds to 5 minutes for code to compile like it's the 90s, or?
No. Most of my code is compiling a couple of seconds, 5 seconds.
Okay.
Another couple of seconds in really launching the app. where it attaches the debugger and stuff like that, and then the app comes up. Gosh, I haven't actually timed it in quite a while because that wasn't the performance I was concerned with. So I honestly don't know how long it takes. It certainly takes a little longer on the Mac side. But part of that is further exacerbated by the fact that all of my code is currently in Swift 2 rather than Swift 3 or Swift 4. Mm-hmm, yeah. And so they're not still working, as far as I know, on making the Swift 2 compiler faster.
No.
So I'm missing a year's worth of compiler optimizations.
I wouldn't be surprised if they start introducing bugs in it to make you upgrade.
That would be painful.
Yeah.
Eventually I'm going to have to do it, and I'm going to have to figure out where my problem is. I've got a bug when I try and do my conversion that just 8 days about 2 months ago and couldn't resolve it and had to roll back. I would be much happier if I was all the way up in Swift 3 and getting ready to do a conversion to Swift 4. But honestly, at this stage, I may just wait until they've got somewhere around Swift 5. Maybe we finally get the code compatibility, or binary compatibility. I'm not sure. So whatever the one is that makes it so that I don't necessarily have to rewrite it every time, and just do that big conversion one more time, because we're talking 30,000 lines of Swift code.
Yeah, that's not to be trifled with.
A little bit more in Visual Studio. Swift is less verbose than C#. The code is a little more concise, at least in most cases.
I mean, there are a lot of colleges around. You could probably take this problem to a professor and look, this could be a really informative thing for your students to learn. I'm willing to sacrifice my time and my code to help you solve this issue with your students.
Yeah, not so much.
It would be very noble of you.
Yeah. Now, what it'll probably end up being is a Apple developer support ticket.
No, better idea. Take it to a game jam. And it's the worst game there. But you're in the environment, and that's your game. You have to make that weekend is moving from Swift 2 to Swift 5 or whatever it is.
Erg. Most of the conversion only took me a couple hours. I mean, it converted relatively straightforward. It was just that once it was converted, it didn't work anymore.
Yeah.
And I chased it around for a couple of days, but couldn't make the thing work. So it wasn't technically a problem with Swift. It was, now that I was running the newer version of Xcode, I was also getting a different compiler, and I was getting a compile time or a runtime error that caused a crash. And I'm not in a position at this point to say, well, that's because Apple's doing it wrong. No, it's probably my code somewhere, but it's crashing in a weird spot. Anyway, that's not the topic at hand.
Yeah. So the other difference that I saw with Unreal Engine and C++ versus Unity and C# is the Microsoft IntelliSense was always struggling to catch up with Unreal Engine. Like, just opening the app for the first time that day, it's just going to sit there and think about Unreal Engine for 2 or 3 minutes before it starts offering code completion. And then you make a bunch of changes, and it's got to think and update. It's got 3 little animated dots that it would run through. And that was just a little tiresome. Like, I just want to write some code, but I have to wait. or have to misspell stuff or risk misspelling stuff or using the wrong names.
Mm-hmm.
And I haven't seen that with C#. And I think it's just the difference. I'm not sure if it's the difference in languages or the fact that you've just got this massive chunk of game engine code. But it was annoying. I know there are a couple third-party solutions to get around that I was probably going to buy eventually, or I will buy eventually if I do more stuff in Unreal Engine. But it was just kind of a weird, quirky thing that I wasn't too thrilled about working in. But yeah, so far, I don't know. I want to solve more interesting problems in C#, and I've been, I've got a little solo learn app on my phone that I noodle in from time to time. It has nothing to do with Unity or game development, just C# in the abstract, just solving little challenges. But I just need to do more stuff with it. Yeah, just like I used to solve my own problems for my business or myself using FileMaker, I need to do the same thing with C# or C++ or Swift or PHP, just other things I want to learn, rather than make another FileMaker database for everything. And it sounds like a good idea until I've just automated most of my system and the way that I work into 2 or 3 apps. It's I don't have anything to make anymore.
Right.
I don't need a new books database. I don't need a new finance database. I don't need a time tracking app. I solved my time tracking app by I don't track time anymore. So solves that problem.
Yep.
So yeah, I think that's all I've got this week. Anything else you want to say?
So did you decide you didn't want to get into the tabs versus spaces argument?
Absolutely not. So that's our show for this week. Thanks for listening.
You can find us on Twitter. I'm at VRHermit_Dave.
And I'm at VRHermit_Joe. We also have a website, vrhermits.com.
If you could, like us on iTunes, Overcast, Stitcher, or your podcast player of choice.